Hi, my name is Juan, and welcome to The Couch, a podcast where real therapists talk about real things. Please remember that we are therapists, but we are not your therapists, and this podcast is intended for educational purposes only. Why do men struggle with their mental health? Why is therapy hard for men? So those are just some questions out there to think on, to sit with. Today's podcast episode, of course, as you can see in the title, it's all about men in therapy, men going to therapy. And as a male myself, this is a really neat topic. As a male, this is a neat topic. As a clinician working with men, this is a neat topic. As a male of color, this is a neat topic. As just me here showing up with you. And you know what? This is an important topic. Did you know that around 9% of men experience feelings of depression and anxiety in the U.S.? Did you know that, when we look at the CDC, right, there's an important item there that talks about suicide risk among men. And those are just a few of the items that are important for us to hold attention for. More often than not, what I find is that when it comes to men, they're not talking about their mental health. They're saying they're okay when they're not okay. They're brushing things, instead of off their shoulders like Jay-Z. They're brushing things under the rug. They keep going. They keep pushing. They hustle harder, right? Trying to survive. But it doesn't always work well that way, right? Right, when we pretend that I can keep going, that I don't need to talk about this, I don't need to deal with this, at some point, it's too much to carry. At some point, all that stuff that went under the rug, it's a lump, and now you're tripping over it. So this episode is going to come from different angles. It's gonna be about why men don't go to therapy. It's going to highlight tips that can support men when it comes to mental health, language around mental health in men, core reasons that men often find it difficult to go to a therapist. And this is really a great episode. If you fit into that category as a man and you're listening in, or maybe your significant partner is, and you're listening to this to see how you could be of help. Maybe you want to send them this. So let's start with core reasons that therapy can be hard for men. Men often approach life with the mindset of solitary problem solving. I can solve this on my own. I got this. And this is an interesting one because I see this in heterosexual relationships. I'll see this with a guy and his partner, right? Jim and Sarah. And Sarah has got some sort of issue happening in life, right? And she wants to talk about it. She needs to create that space with her spouse. And then he comes in and he's like, bam, there's a solved. What's next? But then she's like, whoa. And he's thinking, what's the issue? We solved it. Why are we still here? Right? So what's happening there is that men often find therapy challenging because it's not just solving a problem. Just like this example here, his spouse is not just wanting him to solve a problem. She's wanting him to dig deep and talk about some of these core feelings, right? To get into these aspects of what's called emotional intelligence. So just in case you weren't aware, emotional intelligence, that is having this skill we'll call emotional intelligence that allows you to create and to thrive in relationships with yourself and with others. 4 components to emotional intelligence. You've got recognizing emotions, understanding emotions, managing emotions, and then receiving, perceiving empathy in yourself and in others, right? All of that pulls in there. And you could branch out from there as far as looking at emotional intelligence as involving self-awareness, social awareness, relationship management, and self-regulation. So the first one there, core reasons that therapy can be hard for men, and it's that mindset of a lot of guys that will have, myself sometimes in that category, is you're just trying to solve this problem on your own. So my friends out there, try not to solve problems on your own, right? Ask for a little bit of help. That's a strength, right? Asking for a little bit of help is a strength. Repeat that with me. Another core reason that therapy can be hard for men: socialized gender expectations, right? So if you think about just where you're at, where you live, what's the social expectations for men? You know, what's the expectations around them? I know I worked with this guy about 4 or 5 years ago. This must have been like in early, what year are we in? 2024, so like 2020, somewhere around there. And when we talked about this, he was able to list it out. He was like, where I grew up, I'm expected to be this, to be that. And then I said, okay, now you tell me, who do you want to be? And that was an interesting question we got to, because what came out of it was, am I living a life based on expectations that are built for me, or am I living a life based on expectations that I want to have for myself? And that's a big difference there. Now, often a lot of men may find therapy difficult, or struggle to kind of get in there because of this item here of socialized gender expectation. Another item is pre-existing beliefs from childhood about what men should be or how men should act. And that does relate to socialized gender expectation, right? So it could be that, this guy grows up in a house and, parents or dad may say, stop crying, man up. So then what does he do, right? He stops crying and he does this thing called man up. Well, next thing you know, he's driving down 40 and he sees a billboard, start counseling today. It's okay to cry. So he goes, that's some BS, right? And he's thinking that's some BS because that pre-existing belief, right? He was a kid. As a child, he grew up in a house where man up, stop crying. But what's happening inside this guy, right? He's driving this car and this guy has feelings. And they're in there, they're bottled up. And we know what happens when you bottle up something. It doesn't come out very pretty. Another core reason that therapy can be hard for men typically approach challenges with the fix the problem mentality. Now, I mentioned that one earlier, but what I didn't mention was that men approach it with that mentality instead of vulnerability. Right? Instead of opening up and, hey, let's talk about these feelings that I got in here. There's some pre-existing beliefs and stereotypes affecting men. I think this sometimes get in the way of seeking help. I mentioned earlier, some of those are where men experience early messages from caregivers, early messages from maybe a parent. And that could be, stop crying. Get over that. You need to step up and be a man. Suck it up. Don't let them see you crying. Boys don't do that. Right? So there's all these messages. And look, here's a neat way to see things sometimes. You've got a tablet. You got your iPad. You want to put some programs on it. So what do? You download the programs on there. So now your tablet went from this factory-based tablet that didn't have too much on it to now it's got all these programs on it, and it became this new thing. So a child comes into the world, and the child grows up into this system where it says, stop crying, man up, get over it. Boys don't do that. And all of those are programs, applications that get downloaded into this individual. So now this individual morphs into that, if you will. and you can see the challenge that you've got this kid that spent years seeing life this way. It's not going to be a quick of I'm ready for therapy. More often than not, it's a whole process of unlearning, of becoming comfortable with it. So what takes place is that messages, like the ones shared, men receive, create an internal dialogue and a blueprint for how to be a man, how to function as a man. So with this mindset, boys grow into men and over time experience a lot of different challenges because of that mindset. So now, we talked a little bit about some of the barriers, right? And that's what those are. Some of those barriers that often keep men from working with a counselor. So now let's look at some tips men can use to take care of their mental health. So if you're a guy out there listening, open up both of those ears for me, please. Number one, learn exactly how to validate your feelings. And I mean that. How to validate your feelings. How do I validate my feelings? To be honest, there's an actual process to this. Now, it ain't a sprint. It's a slow process that is powerful. It's a slow process and it's deliberate. Men often have a hard time with validation of feelings because at some point, someone during childhood told them to suck it up or stop crying. And that's that thing when it comes to the difficulty of validation. Right. If I'm a kid and I'm a little boy and I'm struggling with something and I'm crying because I don't know, someone on the soccer field didn't pass me the ball and I feel hurt inside, and then my parents says suck it up, I didn't get the opportunity to have someone to validate what I was feeling, which is somebody took the soccer ball from me, so I feel hurt. And that'd be very different if someone stopped at that moment and said, hey, what's going on? And then I say, here is what's going on. They say, tell me more. Then I tell them more. And then they go, it sounds like you're feeling hurt. And I say, yes, I'm feeling hurt. I wanted the ball and they took it from me. And then they say, I'm sorry you went through that. I know that's not a great feeling to feel. And then I say, yeah, thank you. Something around that. Right? That whole process there, that's an emotional intelligence process. That allows people to share how they feel, to get them validated, to go back and forth. Now, if I'm a kid and I didn't get that, if I got the fast forward version, which is someone took my ball, I start crying, my parent says, suck it up and get back out there. You see what I'm saying? It encourages that mentality, which is that mentality of solving problems, of not getting vulnerable. And that then hurts later in life, because later I could be in a relationship, in a marriage, and the same thing can happen. My partner could be going through an emotional situation, and then I just go, hey, we dealt with that yesterday. I'm not talking about that again. Let's just move past it, right? We're here today. Let's do something fun. Let's not worry about that. And really what I'm doing is I'm rinsing and repeating some of that childhood that I went through as far as not going into vulnerability and sticking more into that logic, sticking more into lower levels of emotional intelligence, if you will. So here what you can do, as a guy listening to this, you can build awareness to what you feel. Yeah, build awareness to what you feel. For a lot of men, it's a little easier to think about physical feelings. So let's say that you're going for a run through a trail in the woods. You hit one of those roots that are way too high, and damn, now you fall, you roll, you pick yourself up. You're like, man, I'm not as young as I once was. You look at your ankle, and it's a big old ball. Swollen. It hurts. So you feel that. So then you go, well, shit, this sucks. This hurts. So you validate it. And then maybe you take it easy. You walk back. So you give yourself comfort. And then maybe when you walk back, your spouse or partner says, what's wrong? So then you talk about it. I was running and then I fell. They say, are you okay? And then you go, yeah, but it's hurting. And they go, why don't you sit down? Let me get you some ice. Then you say, thank you. Right? So it's a whole process there. That's beautiful. You want to give that to yourself. You want to be able to look at it not just physically. But let's say you got off work and you try to come up with a good idea, but your boss didn't even give you a cent of attention. So then you're at work now and you're pissed and you're angry. Instead of brushing it off, Take a moment, get a piece of paper, write down, how do I feel right now? I feel frustrated. I feel frustrated because I stood up and I shared how I felt. And I really wanted, my boss to say, hey, that's a good idea. I think we'll apply it, not today, maybe at a different time. I appreciate you taking the leap there. I wanted to hear something like that. I didn't hear something like that, so I feel hurt. Right? That's an important process for you to be able to, as a man, to take time to dive in, to dig into it. And then here's why. It is literally just as similar as to the example of you roll your ankle when you're running. Well, you got two options. You can roll your ankle while you're running, and then you can get up with that swollen ankle, and you can jump underneath a squat rack with 200 to 300 pounds and start squatting. What's going to happen to the ankle? It's not going to get better. Right? So that's where I'm getting at. Next item. Right? These are tips men can use to take care of their mental health. Get to know your symptoms. Get to know what your symptoms are. Now, you've got a phone more than likely. If not, get a piece of paper, something to write with. Start taking 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes. I know you got 2 minutes. Take 2 minutes 3 times a day. Pause and reflect on what you're feeling. It's a little practice, very small. All you're going to do is you're going to pause and write down, what am I feeling? And at first, for a lot of guys, this is hard because they go, I don't know, I'm feeling fine, okay, frustrated. Well, my friends, that's the top of it. Over time, you're going to be like a ninja at this. A lot of times for guys, they get really good at this when it comes to like something else, like a work task. So if I say, okay, I want you to think about your job and you got to execute in some sort of way. What's a one letter word that you could use to highlight what you're going to do? And they may say, I'm going to delegate. All right, cool. Now tell me exactly what does that mean and break it down for me. So then they'll say, okay, I'm going to delegate this task because this person's got the right skill for it. And I'm going to do this and that. And they break down this whole process for me. I go, wonderful. You got the skill. Now let's just transfer it to a different category. So getting to know your symptoms. If you have a hard time with this as a guy and you notice that you get stuck with just those top layer words of I feel good or I'm okay or I'm angry or I'm frustrated, but you can't get deeper, use that iceberg example. Here's what you do. You get a piece of paper, draw a giant triangle. Once you have this triangle, that top part of it, the peak, draw a horizontal line towards that top piece. Leave just a little bit, enough for it to be an iceberg, and that line is a body of water. Right there is where you write down that description of how you feel. So if I feel angry, you write angry up there. And then below it, you try to come up with what else means anger or is seen as anger. So it could be my fists are clenched. My stomach is hurting. I'm irritable. I'm a bit sad, right? So those are some of the other feelings you're trying to dig in there. Third item here, tips men can use to take care of their mental health. I want you to take a moment. There's a book called The Body Keeps Score. I'm not going to say too much about it other than what the title just said. The body keeps score. Right? So it's no different than that description I gave you if you're running through a trail and you fall and you hurt your ankle. Well, your body just kept score. Right? Score is you got a sore ankle. Now, what happens if you keep running and then you start lifting weights with that sore ankle? Your body's going to keep a little more score and it's going to maybe have another injury. So this is a really neat read. I think you get a lot of value out of it. Number 4, what you can do to take care of your mental health. Work with a counselor. And it doesn't just have to be a male counselor. It's good to get individuals from a different perspective. And when it comes to counseling, it's an interesting ride. Give it a little bit of time. It's rare you'll go to a counselor and it's a one-time thing and then you go in there and you're like, man, that just completely changed my life. If I had a magic wand to make that happen for individuals, that'd be great. It takes time though. Right? It's like, I forget who shared this. Simon Sinek, maybe. So he had this example. I think that's what it was. And he goes, all right, if you have a goal of getting in shape, maybe losing weight, and you go to the gym. Now, before you go to the gym, you go home and you take your shirt off and you see what you look like. So then you say, all right, I'm going to the gym, change my life. You go to the gym and you exercise for 1 hour. You get on the treadmill, you lift some weights. You even have a personal trainer there to help you out. You get home, you go to the same mirror, you take your shirt off. What do you see? Right? Do you see a complete transformation? Unfortunately not. You see more than likely the exact same thing. And the second day you do it, probably the same exact thing. Third day, it's not till a while longer that you start seeing some of these changes. So keep that in mind. It takes time, my friends. It takes time. I notice with men express mental health a little differently sometimes. Things that I'll see instead of depression or anxiety, like the classic symptoms, I'll see anger, difficulty managing mood, irritability, lashing out with aggression, pursuing risky behaviors, maybe drinking too much or staying at work too long, avoiding conversations, muscle tension, body aches, pains, having a hard time focusing, isolation, sadness, and often that comes from too much of the isolation, and often that sadness looks like quietness, suicidal ideations. We talked about that risk of suicide among men, problems sleeping. Now we're at the end of the episode. And I'll share with you, this could have been a long episode because I think there's a lot of great topics when it comes to men and mental health. We're just scratching at the surface. There's so much more we could have dug into. Now, here's my hope. My hope is that if you are someone out there listening and you got a male in your life, share this with them. If you are a male listening to this, and if you're anyone who's listening to this and you find it helpful, I'm glad that you find it helpful. As a male myself, so much of these items resonate with me. I mean, I grew up in a Hispanic machismo-like culture where many of those statements I grew up hearing. I certainly grew up in a culture that now looking at the profession I have is very different than where I was at. And there's that understanding of it's challenging to talk about how you feel. There is like a pressure of vulnerability there, right? The words don't come out smooth. And that's a barrier, right? Because when we don't effectively address our mental health, it doesn't just disappear. It's that whole, right, analogy of you put it under the rug, it turns into a lump, now you're tripping your whole life. And when you trip, you're tripping on yourself, which hurts, right? You're hurting yourself. You are tripping on your peers. Then you start hurting those relationships. You're tripping on your spouse. You start hurting that relationship. You trip on your job. Then you start hurting yourself in different spaces and settings. My hope is that this is a light bulb moment. Number one, you show up and love yourself. Number two, reach out. Whether it's a book to get the process going, reach out to a counselor. You can reach out to us at Santos Counseling. More than happy to help. Get the process going. Thank you for listening.